We all know Moses, right? One of the most important figures in the Abrahamic faiths. From the moment he escaped Pharaoh's wrath, when his mother sent him down the river Nile in a basket, till when he followed God's direction by leading the people of Israel out of their 400 years of slavery in Egypt, much is said about the escapades of this great man. That said, little is known where he died and the events following his death. Some people don't even know that there was an almighty tussle for the body of Moses. Yes, it sounds insane, but this strange event has actually been chronicled in several biblical accounts. After all, this is Moses, the liberator of the people of Israel from the hands of the nefarious Pharaoh, who had enslaved God's chosen people for many generations. So it is interesting to learn that despite how important Moses is to the people of Israel, very little is known about how exactly he died and where he was laid to rest. All we know is that following the demise of this great man, it is said that God himself laid Moses to rest in an undisclosed location. What many do not know about is that following the laying to rest of one of God's most faithful servants, the devil tried to implicate himself in this story by getting into a violent skirmish with Archangel Michael over the remains of this great man. As incredible as this scene may sound, it is actually chronicled in the book of Jude. If you turn over to the book of Jude, one would find that Satan and Archangel Michael did go toe-to-toe over the body of Moses. One can only imagine the scene as once more, the devil went against one of his nemesis. It all began when Moses found that his days were nearing their end after quite a remarkable life. It is interesting that despite a life of stellar service to God, he would make a serious mistake that would put his arrival in the Promised Land into jeopardy. You see, as the people of Israel went on their 40-year journey through the desert in order to find the Promised Land, they found that at some point in time, they began to experience what could only be described as a drought. In order to keep his people hydrated, God instructed Moses to speak to a rock so that water would gush out of it, thereby providing his people with the water that they desperately needed. Seems like simple instructions, right? Well, Moses seemed to still be very miffed about the amount of pressure that the people of Israel forced him to face while requesting for this water. As a result, Moses turned to his people and asked angrily why he must always bring water for them to drink. As if this wasn't bad enough, rather than speaking to the rock like God instructed him to, Moses struck it out of this same anger. This series of words and actions would prove to be a big no-no in the eyes of the Lord. For starters, Moses used the word "we" instead of the word "God." Moses had nothing to do with this miracle other than following God's instructions. It was only through God's power that this rock was going to miraculously sprout out some water. By saying "we," Moses may have implied that he had something to do with this provision of water and that it cannot be tolerated by God. As if this wasn't bad enough, Moses directly disobeyed God when he struck that rock out of anger. As such, Moses had to face the wrath of God. This came in the form of being informed that he will never see the Promised Land due to his actions. It must have been crushing to learn this, especially after everything that he had done during his ministry. Unfortunately, one cannot be seen to go against the word of God in such a manner. As such, Moses eventually met his end in the land of Moab, where he got a view of this Promised Land before he eventually perished. Following his demise, it is said that the Lord buried Moses in the land of Moab, but mysteriously, nobody knows where he was buried, even till this day. This is significant because of how unusual it was for God himself to get involved in the burial of a man. If anything, it tells us of how close Moses was to God. Not only was Moses God's servant, he was also his close friend who could rest deep within the bosom of God. As such, the burial can be seen as an act of friendship and honor. With that in mind, we are left to ponder on why God kept the final resting place of Moses a secret. Perhaps the answers lay in the devious plans of the devil. Apparently, the devil hatched a plan to claim the body of Moses, perhaps as a way to taunt God with the body of his recently dearly departed friend. Fortunately, Archangel Michael arrived at the scene to thwart such a devious plan. Although we do not have the details of such an epic battle, we know that Archangel Michael, one of the most powerful angels that exist in the pantheon, was indeed able to put the devil in his place. Interestingly, during this confrontation, Archangel Michael didn't not rebuke the devil in his own name, but in the name of the Lord. By doing this, he displayed his humility as he knew that the power to rebuke Satan is that of God and God alone. Now that we know that Archangel Michael was able to keep the body of Moses out of the dangerous hands of the devil, one can actually look into why the devil actually wanted to get hold of this body. There is a belief that Satan wanted to prevent God from resurrecting Moses. He was even worried that God may want to take Moses to heaven in his earthly form, like he would do with Elijah and Enoch. Maybe this was due to the fact that he knew one day Elijah would be there with Moses on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus. Eager to put this to an end, one can see how Satan would have gone through such lengths as to attempt to get his hands on the body of Moses. As interesting as such a theory is, there is another theory in which some believe that the devil wanted to get a hold of the body of Moses so that he could use it as an object of idolatry for the Israelites. This was just like the golden calf incident that occurred when Moses went up into the mountains to retrieve the 10 Commandments from God. Maybe he could use this to divert the people of Israel from truly worshiping God. With this in mind, it made sense that God hid the body of his loyal servant and friend so that he could protect his people from the devious plans of the devil. Fascinating, but the final theory may hold more water. Some think that as Satan is considered to be the accuser that is referred to in Revelation 12:10, he would have wanted to get possession of the body of Moses so that he could accuse him of the sins that he committed in the past, thereby proving his unworthiness of God's kindness and mercy thanks to these sins of the past. This is just as bad as another theory which claims that Satan wanted to get hold of the body of Moses as a way to mock God's plan and power. In his typical fashion, he was hoping to claim the body of Moses as a trophy. This is just another way for the devil to continue with his pranks, as he loves to constantly challenge the plans that God has put into place for his beloved creations. Fortunately, as Satan's cunning and devious nature seems to have no limit, so does God's power and wisdom. As such, no matter what Satan tries to do to stick a wrench into God's plan, God will always have the final say. That is why he was also able to thwart the plans that the devil had toward the body of his dear friend and servant. It would help the devil go a long way to learn that there is nothing that he can ever do to overcome God's plan. With this in mind, it is clear that even though Moses lived a life of many battles against man and the elements as he set off on the journey of liberating his people so that he could take them to the promised land, he would find that even when he found himself in the afterlife, his body would still be entangled in another battle for the ages. Looking beyond this, one can see how this takes us to the principle of true worship. Time and time again, the people of Israel have succumbed to the temptation of idol worship. Looking at how Satan may have had plans to exploit the body of Moses so that he can lure the people of Israel into idol worship once more, one can see how the devil would continue to use weakness to lure us to sin. Add in the fact that God chose to protect the body of his beloved servant, despite his disobedience in his final days, shows that God's love is unconditional, especially to those whom he loves, even in the face of their failure. As such, it is a testament of the power of true worship as it can protect us from the devious hands of the devil.